What's up, guys? Welcome to your hand of the day for Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. This one I sent over to my coach because I was totally dumbfounded on why GTO Wizard wanted me to do what it's suggesting. But then he talked me through it a little bit, and I want to see if I can reinforce my learning just by talking through it with you all. So let's dive into it. All right, here we go. We are 30 bigs deep-ish, mid stages of a tournament. And we get a early position raise off of a 25 big blind stack. So we're playing for 25 bigs. Everybody folds. I got ace-9 offsuit, which, okay, so first here is the raiser's range in the low jack. All the suited aces, most suited kings, a lot of Broadway stuff, pairs 4 and better, offsuit aces, offsuit kings. Okay, a lot of Broadway. So I'm calling this all day. Let me go to my calling range. You can see you're calling all your offsuit aces, all your offsuit kings, most of your offsuit queens, blah, blah, blah. You get it. So I'm going to call this. And then the flop is pretty phenomenal for us. 9, 6, 3, 2 diamonds. Be nice if we had a diamond, but still pretty good for us. We know from prior videos against a pre-flop raiser, especially earlier position, we are mostly going to check to them. There's no difference here, even though this is a great board for us. And this is an opportunity to think about check raising. So I check, and our opponent on this board is not a range bet, that's for sure. They're supposed to check about 40% of their hands. Why is this not a range bet? Well, you got to think about what the big blind calls with. Could have a lot of, this is just a very, very dynamic board. 7, 8, I could definitely have 9, 6, I could have 5, 4, I can have 2 diamonds, I can have ace 9, king 9, queen 9, all that kind of stuff. So there's a decent chance that I caught a piece of this board, maybe a big piece of it. So our opponent should be cautious. You can see they're betting with all their 9s, but I block their 9s because I have a 9. All their overpairs, and then they're going to bet with a lot of Broadway combinations with diamonds in them, probably. And they're calling with all the, or they're betting with all this stuff because they have 2 overcards to the board. But you can see they're checking a lot. They're checking a lot, even with their big Broadway cards. So our opponent bets, and that's basically a range bet sizing. And so I'm like, let's put you to the test. I want to see if you got the goods. And you can see here, a check raise is the right move. You're never just calling. Here's my thinking about it. The check raise makes a lot of sense because my hand needs a ton of protection. Sure, it'd be nice to catch an ace, but if a king comes out, a queen or a jack or a 10, I'm not very happy. If our opponent has like a backdoor flush draw, we want to build a pot, so they have to pay for it. So that was my thinking on the check raise. And then our opponent calls. Now here's where I got really confused, and I'm actually going to bring up my coach's notes so I can read through this as we talk through the hand. So after he calls my check raise, a king comes off. My thinking at the time was that king is really good for my opponent's range. So I think I need to slow down, which was actually partially correct. So you can see here, GTO Wizard's like, it's time to go into check mode. Ace 9. Really anything, because that king's so good for our opponent's range. So I did that right, maybe for the wrong reasons. And then our opponent decides to bet 4 into 17, which is kind of an odd bet. let's look at what they're doing that with. I'm guessing it's like 10 jack and queen jack and stuff like that. Yeah, you can see. So they're betting all their kings, obviously. They're going to bet ace, king, aces. But let's look at bluffs. Queen jack, suited and offsuit. Queen 10, a little bit. 10 9, although we block that. But you can see like ace 10, that's just a stone cold bluff. And here's what my coach said. I'm just going to read it to you guys. So what it wants us to do after our opponent bets this 20%, let's go to our response. Ace 9, club, spade. Ace 9, club, spade. All in. 73% of the time all in. Basically go all in. And I was like completely dumbfounded by this. But here's his explanation for it. The main reason solver wants us to jam the turn is due to the fact that the king is so much better for our opponent than it is for us, to the point that they get to continue the turn incredibly wide, which makes sense. They get to see one more card with a big range, is basically what he's saying. So the assumption GTO Wizard is making when we jam is that we get lots of folds while also denying equity to hands like Queen 10, Queen Jack, and flush draws, which we talked about as their bluffs. So jam is not it doesn't feel awesome, but the reason it's the best choice with these hands is because we're at the top of our range, meaning this is probably one of the best hands we're going to have in this scenario. And because our opponent gets to bluff with a lot of holdings on a card that looks scary. Now, could this opponent have a king? Yeah, of course they could. And we lose, and that sucks. But they could also have a lot of Queen 10 and Queen Jack and a lot of suited stuff that is looking to get to a diamond on the river. So that's the rationale for this spot. And I'll just show you how it played out, just in case there's interest. I decided just to call, which I can see in retrospect is just a bad option because, I mean, at this point, like if anything comes off other than a diamond, I think I'm just supposed to call. I checked again on this 8. Our opponent went all in. And this is another thing that coach said. Once we do call turn, we really have to call river in this spot due to the fact that this hand is actually very close to the top of our range and it doesn't block any of our opponent's most obvious bluffs, which there should be lots of on this run out. So if we had a diamond, less likely they're chasing a diamond flush. We don't have a 10, we don't have a queen, we don't have a jack, so they're going to have a lot of missed straights. So it's just a call on the river. So hopefully that walkthrough helps. It definitely helps me kind of crystallize some thinking. And hopefully we can do this more in the future with coach feedback. All right, everybody. See you next time.